Welcome to Nonfiction Insights. Today we're taking a deep dive into Morgan Housel's The Psychology of Money. One of the most striking ideas in the book, at least for me, was this emphasis on behavior over intelligence when it comes to money.
Oh, absolutely. Housel really drives that point home, doesn't he? He basically says that doing well with money has less to do with how smart you are.
And more to do with, well, how you behave.
Exactly. It's almost counterintuitive. You'd think that people with high IQs or those who are really good at math would be naturally great with money.
Right, like you'd think they'd have some sort of advantage.
But the book is full of examples that challenge that assumption. I mean, even geniuses can make terrible financial decisions if they lack emotional control.
And on the flip side, ordinary people can become wealthy if they have those behavioral skills down.
Oh, for sure.
Even if you're financially literate, even if you understand the markets, if you don't have a handle on your emotions, it can really hurt you.
Totally agree. Mastering your own financial psychology, that's the real foundation. And the book dives into why our financial psychology can be so different from person to person.
It's personal, right? What shapes our individual views on money?
Well, a huge factor is our past experiences with money, our personal history, the kind of financial environment we grew up in, our family's attitude towards money, all of that. It shapes how we think about money, the kind of lens we view it through.
I can see that.
Yeah.
Someone who grew up during a recession, for example, is probably going to approach risk very differently than someone who's always known economic stability.
Absolutely. Or think about, say, someone who grew up in poverty versus someone from a wealthy background. They're likely to have vastly different ideas about what constitutes a financial risk or a good investment.
It's almost like those early experiences become embedded in our financial DNA.
And the book has some fascinating examples of how this plays out in the real world. Comparing the outlook of a stockbroker during the Great Depression to, let's say, a tech worker in the late 90s.
Those are like night and day, those two experiences. And they both have a huge impact on how those individuals approach money.
Exactly. Even something like how long a country has gone without a recession can shape its citizens' financial outlook. Like Australians, they haven't had a recession in 30 years, so their perspective on risk is probably quite different.
So for listeners, it's important to consider your own financial background. Recognizing how your own past might be shaping your money decisions can lead to more self-awareness, which is like the first step to making better choices.
Absolutely. And it ties into another really important concept from the book, this idea that no one's crazy.
Okay, that's an interesting one. How so?
Well, you know how sometimes you see people making financial decisions that seem completely bonkers? Like, why would they ever do that?
Yeah, we've all been there. It's hard to wrap your head around sometimes.
House's point is that everyone's financial choices make sense to them at that moment, based on what they've experienced, what they know, and their own circumstances.
So instead of judging, we should try to understand where they're coming from.
Right, like that example in the book of people with low incomes who spend a lot on lottery tickets. It seems illogical from a purely financial perspective, right?
Yeah, those odds are minuscule.
But for someone who's struggling financially, who doesn't see many opportunities for advancement, that lottery ticket represents hope. It's their shot at a better life.
I guess it's about buying into a dream.
Exactly. It's not just about the money. It's about that feeling of possibility, however slim the chances might be. So what seems crazy to one person might make perfect sense to another, depending on their context.
We need to be more understanding of different financial perspectives, even if they don't align with our own.
Definitely. Now, another big theme in the book is the role of luck and risk in financial outcomes.
Something we don't always like to acknowledge, right? We love those rags to riches stories where hard work and talent are the only ingredients.
But the truth is, luck and risk play a huge part, and the book makes a strong case for acknowledging that.
It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that successful people just made all the right moves.
Yeah, but for every Bill Gates out there are probably countless others who are just as talented and hardworking, but didn't get those same lucky breaks.
And then on the flip side, people can make really smart decisions and still end up failing just because they were unlucky.
The book has that great analogy about the guy who wins the lottery being featured on the front page of the newspaper,
While the thousands who bought tickets and lost are never mentioned.
Exactly. It's a reminder that we often overestimate the role of skill and underestimate the role of chance.
And the book even questions how much of a role luck played in the success of someone like Cornelius Vanderbilt.
Oh, yeah, Vanderbilt. He was a fascinating character, a true risk taker. But it's hard to disentangle how much of his success was due to brilliant business decisions versus just being in the right place at the right time.
So I guess the takeaway here is Success isn't always entirely our own doing,
And failure isn't always a sign of incompetence. It's about understanding that both luck and risk are always at play.
which brings us to another key concept: enough. The book argues that this constant striving for more money, more possessions, it doesn't necessarily lead to happiness.
It can actually be counterproductive.
I love that story about Kurt Vonnegut and Joseph Heller at that party.
Oh, yeah, the one where Heller points out that he has something the billionaire host probably doesn't, and that's a sense of enough.
It's about being content with what you have.
Exactly. Because when you always want more, you're never truly satisfied. And the book has some cautionary tales about what can happen when that desire for more becomes all-consuming.
Like the story of Rajat Gupta, who had it all but risked it all for even more wealth.
A classic example of how that pursuit of more can lead to really bad decisions. So it's a question worth pondering, isn't it? What does enough mean for you?
It's a personal thing, for sure. But having that clear definition, that sense of contentment, that can be more valuable than any amount of money.
Absolutely. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about the power of compounding. This is a concept that's often misunderstood, but is absolutely crucial for building long-term wealth.
Yeah, it's kind of a magical thing, isn't it?
It really is. It's this idea that even small amounts of money, when invested consistently over time, can grow into something really significant.
It's like that snowball analogy. It starts small, but as it rolls down the hill, it gets bigger and bigger.
And the book uses Warren Buffett as the prime example. He's been compounding his wealth for decades, and that's a big part of why he's so successful.
And it's interesting because his returns aren't necessarily astronomical.
No, it's more about consistency and time. The book compares him to Jim Simons, a brilliant investor who's actually achieved higher average annual returns than Buffett.
But because Simon started investing later in life, he hasn't had as much time for those returns to compound.
Exactly. So the message here is that time is your biggest ally when it comes to investing. Start early, be consistent, and let compounding work its magic.
So we've talked about getting wealthy, but the book also makes a distinction between getting wealthy and staying wealthy.
It's an important distinction. They're two different skill sets, right?
Yeah, a lot of people can make a lot of money, but keeping it is another story altogether.
The book argues that survival is the single most important word when it comes to staying wealthy.
It's about not losing it all.
Exactly. And it highlights the importance of having a margin of safety in your finances. This means things like living below your means, having some flexibility in your plans, and not being overly reliant on debt.
It's about building resilience so you can withstand those inevitable bumps in the road.
Like market crashes, job losses, unexpected expenses, you name it. Those things happen, and if you're not prepared, they can wipe you out.
And the book features Michael Moritz from Sequoia Capital, talking about that constant fear of going out of business being a key driver of their success. It's about never getting complacent.
Always being prepared for the worst case scenario. And that kind of thinking, that focus on survival, it's what allows you to stay in the game long enough for compounding to really take effect.
Another point the book makes is that we tend to get caught up in those extreme success stories.
The outliers, the overnight millionaire.
Yeah, those are the stories that grab the headlines. But the book reminds us that those are the exceptions, not the rule.
Like in the venture capital world, they know that most of their investments are going to fail. But a few big wins can make up for all those losses.
It's about understanding that those huge successes are rare. Most people will experience some setbacks, some failures along the way.
And that's okay. It's part of the process. Peter Lynch, one of the greatest investors of all time, even said that he's only right about 6 out of 10 times.
So even the experts are wrong a lot.
Exactly. What matters is your overall performance, not whether you win or lose on every single bet. It's about having realistic expectations and not getting discouraged by the inevitable losses.
Now, one of the most profound ideas in the book, at least for me, was this notion that the true value of money is that it buys you control over your time.
Oh, I love that idea. It really resonates with me too.
It's not about the fancy cars or the big houses. It's about the freedom to do what you want, when you want, with who you want.
It's about autonomy.
Exactly. The book cites research showing that people who feel like they have control over their time are generally happier and more satisfied with their lives. And the book makes this interesting point about how wealth has increased in many countries over the past few decades, but happiness levels haven't necessarily kept pace.
It's a bit of a paradox, isn't it? We have more stuff, but we don't seem to be any happier.
And one possible explanation is that we've traded time for money. We're working longer hours, we're more stressed, we have less control over our lives.
So the message here is to be mindful of how your financial decisions are affecting your time. Are you working towards a life that gives you more autonomy and freedom? Because that might be the real key to happiness.
Now, another fascinating concept from the book is this idea of the paradox of signaling wealth.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
So people often pursue wealth as a way to impress others, to show off their status.
But the irony is that most people aren't really that impressed.
They might notice the fancy car or the expensive watch, but they don't necessarily respect the person anymore for it.
And the book has that great anecdote about the valet who observes all these rich people driving up in their luxury cars.
And he realizes that they're often not very nice people.
They're arrogant, they're entitled, they treat him poorly. So it makes you wonder if all that wealth is really worth it if it comes at the expense of your character.
The book argues that true wealth is often invisible. It's the money you've saved, the investments you've made, the freedom you've created for yourself.
It's about having options, about not being beholden to anyone.
And it reminds me of the story of Ronald Reed, that janitor who quietly amassed a fortune over his lifetime.
He lived a simple life, didn't spend lavishly, but he was a multimillionaire.
A perfect example of someone whose true wealth was hidden from the world.
And maybe that's something to aspire to. Building wealth quietly, not for the sake of impressing others, but for the security and freedom it provides.
Another important distinction the book makes is between reasonable and rational financial decisions.
So it's not always about crunching the numbers and finding the mathematically optimal solution.
Because sometimes the most rational choice might not be the best choice for you personally.
Exactly. The book gives the example of Harry Markowitz, the Nobel Prize-winning economist who developed a famous theory for portfolio optimization.
But when it came to his own money, he didn't follow his own theory to the letter.
No, he opted for a simpler, more intuitive approach. And his reasoning was that it just felt better to him.
So sometimes it's okay to go with your gut, to make a decision that feels right, even if it's not perfectly rational.
Especially when it comes to things like investing. Because if you're not comfortable with your investment strategy, you're more likely to panic and make bad decisions when the market inevitably goes down.
And the book also cautions against relying too heavily on past data to predict the future.
The historians as prophets fallacy.
Yeah, because the world's constantly changing. Things happen that we could never have predicted.
Like the Great Depression, World War II, the rise of the internet. These were all events that fundamentally changed the economic landscape.
And even seemingly minor changes, like the introduction of the 401k or the growth of venture capital, can have a huge impact on how we invest and how the markets behave.
So while history can teach us valuable lessons, we can't assume that the future will perfectly mirror the past.
We need to be adaptable, to be open to new possibilities, to be prepared for the unexpected.
Absolutely. Now, one of the most practical takeaways from the book is this idea of building room for error into your financial life.
It's about having a cushion, a safety net.
So that when things inevitably go wrong, you're not completely wiped out.
The book uses the analogy of a blackjack card counter. They might have a statistical edge, but they still need enough money to withstand those losing streaks.
Because if they bet everything they have on every hand, one bad run of luck could ruin them.
And that's true for investing as well. Leverage, for example, can magnify both gains and losses.
So if you're using a lot of leverage, even a small market downturn can have devastating consequences.
It's about being conservative, about not taking on more risk than you can handle.
And it's also about saving for the unexpected. Life is full of surprises, and not all of them are pleasant. So having some extra money set aside can make all the difference when those unexpected expenses arise.
Now, the book also touches on something called the end of history illusion.
Which is?
It's this tendency we have to underestimate how much our own goals and desires will change over time.
We think we know what we want, but 5, 10, 20 years down the road, we might be completely different people with different priorities.
So the book suggests that we should avoid making extreme financial decisions based on our current selves.
Because we might regret them later.
Like locking yourself into a 30-year mortgage when you're not even sure where you'll be living in 5 years.
Or investing all your money in a single stock because you're convinced it's the next big thing.
It's about staying flexible, about keeping your options open.
Exactly. Because life is unpredictable and our own needs and desires are constantly evolving.
Now, another key point the book makes is that successful investing comes at a price.
And it's not just about the fees you pay or the taxes you owe.
It's about the emotional roller coaster you're going to have to ride.
The ups and downs of the market, the fear, the doubt, the uncertainty, the regret.
And a lot of people try to avoid those negative emotions. They try to find investments that will only go up.
But that's not how the market works. There's always risk involved, and there will always be periods of volatility.
And the book argues that trying to avoid that volatility often leads to worse outcomes in the long run.
Because you end up missing out on the potential gains. Or you make impulsive decisions at the worst possible time.
Like selling all your stocks when the market crashes, just when you should be buying more.
Exactly. So it's important to understand that volatility is part of the game. It's the price of admission for participating in the market.
And if you can learn to accept that, to ride out those ups and downs, you'll be much better off in the long run.
Now, another interesting theme in the book is this idea of pessimism versus optimism.
It seems like pessimism is often seen as more intellectual, more sophisticated.
Yeah, like if you're not constantly predicting doom and gloom, you're not being realistic.
But the book makes a pretty compelling case for optimism.
And it points out that the world has actually gotten a lot better over time, despite all the challenges we face.
We're living longer, healthier lives. We have more access to education and technology, and poverty rates have been declining globally.
So while it's important to be aware of the risks, it's also important to recognize the progress that's been made.
And the book suggests that for most people, over the long run, optimism is actually the more rational stance.
Because if you believe that things will generally improve, you're more likely to invest in the future, to take risks, to build something meaningful.
And that brings us to the final big idea from the book, the power of narrative.
The stories we tell ourselves.
Yeah, because the way we understand the world, the way we make decisions, it's all filtered through these narratives.
The book uses the example of the 2008 financial crisis. It wasn't just an economic event, it was a narrative event.
It shook people's confidence in the system. It changed the way they thought about money and risk.
And the book points out that when things are uncertain, when we don't have all the answers, we're more likely to believe in stories, even if they're not true.
Like those conspiracy theories that often pop up during times of crisis.
Or those get-rich-quick schemes that prey on people's desperation.
So the message here is to be aware of the narratives that are shaping your thinking, especially when it comes to money.
Because those stories can have a powerful impact on your decisions, whether they're based in reality or not.
So to wrap up, what are some of the key takeaways from The Psychology of Money? What are the actionable things that listeners can do to improve their financial lives?
Well, I think one of the biggest lessons is to cultivate humility. We need to be humble about our own abilities, humble about the role of luck, humble about the fact that we don't know everything.
And that humility can help us avoid making those big, ego-driven mistakes.
Exactly. Another key takeaway is the importance of saving. Saving is the gap between your ego and your income. The more you can save, the more options you create for yourself.
And those options give you freedom, give you security, give you peace of mind.
The book also stresses the importance of accepting that things will go wrong. You're going to make mistakes, you're going to experience losses, you're going to face unexpected challenges.
It's part of life.
And it's okay. What matters is how you respond to those challenges. If you can learn from your mistakes and keep moving forward, you'll eventually succeed.
Another key takeaway is to use money to gain control over your time, because that's where true wealth lies.
The freedom to do what you want, when you want, with who you want.
And the book encourages us to be less flashy with our wealth. True wealth is often invisible. It's about having the resources to live a comfortable life, to pursue your passions, to give back to others.
And it's about being humble and kind, treating others with respect, regardless of their financial status.
Another practical tip is to simply save consistently. Even if it's just a small amount, the power of compounding will work its magic over time. And the book encourages us to define what success means to us, to figure out what we're willing to pay for it, and to be prepared to pay that price.
Because success always comes with a cost. It might be hard work, it might be sacrifice, it might be volatility, it might be failure.
But if you're clear about what you want and you're willing to pay the price, you're much more likely to achieve it.
The book also stresses the importance of building room for error into our financial lives, having that margin of safety, that cushion that allows us to withstand those unexpected events and keep moving forward.
And finally, the book reminds us that we are not static beings. We are constantly evolving. Our goals are changing. Our circumstances are changing.
So we need to be flexible, we need to be adaptable, we need to be open to new possibilities.
And we need to remember that personal finance is personal. There's no one-size-fits-all approach.
What works for one person might not work for another.
So it's important to find what works for you, what aligns with your values, your goals, your risk tolerance.
And don't be afraid to break the rules, to challenge conventional wisdom, to forge your own path.
And the book wraps up with this really interesting look at the history of the modern consumer.
How did we get to where we are today with our spending habits, our debt levels, our attitudes towards money?
It's a fascinating exploration of how economic conditions, social trends, and cultural shifts have shaped our relationship with money.
And it's a reminder that our current financial behaviors are not inevitable. They are the product of a specific set of historical circumstances.
And if those circumstances change, our behaviors can change too.
So there's hope for the future. We can learn from the past, we can adapt to new realities, we can make better choices.
And that's really what the psychology of money is all about. It's about empowering us to take control of our financial lives, to make decisions that align with our values, and to build a future that we can be proud of.
We hope this deep dive has given you some new insights and some food for thought.
Remember, understanding the psychology of money is just as important as understanding the numbers.
And we encourage you to revisit the book, to reflect on the ideas we've discussed, and to see how they apply to your own unique situation.
What resonated with you? What questions do you still have? We'd love to hear from you in the comments below.
And be sure to subscribe to the Nonfiction Insights channel for more deep dives into the books that are shaping our world.
Thanks for listening.